Cool 98.7, Bismarck Mandan's greatest hits. It is Wish with you, and joining me now is Kenny Albert. He does the NFL and MLB on Fox, and he also was the broadcaster for this past Sunday's Eagles game against the Washington Redskins. Kenny, thanks for taking the time.
No problem, Mark. How are you?
I am fantastic, thanks. Well, obviously, you didn't get an opportunity to see one of Carson Wentz's better games, completing just 11 passes, but overall through the season, I'm curious what your impressions of Carson Wentz are. Obviously, you've been broadcasting the NFL for a long time. You've seen a lot of players, seen a lot of rookies. Just overall, what are your impressions of Carson Wentz?
Well, Mark, very impressed with Wentz from what I've seen on TV, on tape, and really in talking to his teammates and coaches over the weekend, meeting with some Eagles players and coaches on Friday and Saturday, and just hearing them talk about the poise that he shows in the huddle. Fletcher Cox is on the defensive side. Just talked about how quickly he calls the plays in the huddle at practice and changes the plays at the line, and really seems like a 5 or 6 year veteran, a lot more so than a first-year rookie. So I think the fact that he played in a pro-style system in North Dakota State has been a major factor. He's been getting ready for this for the last 3 or 4 years, and obviously had great success in college with his team winning championships every year. So, and the Eagles coaches, is, talking to Doug Peterson, the plan was obviously for Sam Bradford to be the starting quarterback, Chase Daniel the backup, and for Carson Wentz to sit and learn as the number 3. But thanks to the Teddy Bridgewater injury in Minnesota, the Vikings worked out the trade with the Eagles for Bradford, and the Eagles coaching staff made the decision, look, if we're going to have growing pains and have to go through a learning experience, let's do it now rather than later. And 8 days before the regular season, they made the decision to go with Carson Wentz, and it's paid off for the Eagles to this point with wins in their first 3 games, and unfortunately they've lost 2 in a row, but he's off to a terrific start to his NFL career.
Yeah, and it'll be exciting next week when Carson Wentz plays against Sam Bradford, because the Eagles have Minnesota next week. And obviously, I'm sure you don't run into a lot of players and coaches that talk ill of players on their team, but is there anything that stood out about the way people talked about Carson Wentz compared to other rookies that you've covered throughout your career?
It was mostly positive, like I said, 99% positive with regard to Carson Wentz. There have been so many other rookies in recent years that have started, although when you think back 10 or 11 years ago, Carson Palmer, first overall pick, sits a year behind John Kitna in Cincinnati. Aaron Rodgers sits a couple of years behind Brett Favre. Obviously, that was an extenuating circumstance behind a future Hall of Famer. But, no, it was all positive regarding Wentz. Even the Redskins were impressed in talking to their players and coaches. So it didn't work out on the field for the Eagles yesterday. I think in large part due to the fact that their offense was not on the field for 19 and a half minutes of game time, consecutive game time, Mark, yesterday. It was sort of a bizarre second quarter. The Eagles scored touchdowns on special teams and defense within about 3.5 minutes of each other, but what that did was kept their offense on the sideline. The Redskins ran 38 straight plays at one point, not including the kneel down by Carson Wentz at the end of the first half, so they didn't really have much of an opportunity to get things going until the midway portion of the third quarter.
Yeah, Carson Wentz, like you mentioned, lost 2 in a row, and of course, last week against Detroit, he had the interception on the final drive, which spoiled the comeback, and then yesterday not able to do much. How important do you think it is for Carson Wentz, moving forward? This is his first losing streak. They've lost 2 after the bye. I mean, knowing what you know about Carson Wentz and seeing what you saw yesterday, I mean, do you think that Carson Wentz will be able to bounce back quickly and get the team back to their winning ways? And, like I mentioned, Minnesota next week, it's not going to be an easy game.
No, not at all. Tough game against the Vikings at home for the Eagles next Sunday. And the one thing you have to keep in mind is they've played some terrific defenses the last 2 weeks, the Detroit Lions and now the Redskins yesterday, although they have some injuries in the secondary. The Redskins defense played real well yesterday. They had 5 sacks. Ryan Kerrigan had 2.5. They had a sack on the first play from scrimmage, another one later in that drive. So you have to give the defense credit as well.
All right, he is Kenny Albert, broadcaster for the NFL and MLB on Fox. Kenny, before I let you go, this is completely off topic, and I apologize for putting you on the spot, but I know that you had been broadcasting the Dodgers for Fox Sports 1, and obviously being a broadcaster, I don't know if you have any sort of thoughts on Vin Scully ending his career, or if he in any way influenced you in your career, or if you have any stories, if you ever run into him?
Well, the best ever as far as baseball is concerned. I enjoyed listening to Vin Scully on the NBC Game of the Week back in the 80s when he would do the Saturday Game of the Week and the playoffs and World Series every year. never really had a chance to meet him. I would see him in the press box and be around him a little bit, but the only real conversation that I've ever had with him took place this past August, and I was out in Los Angeles to broadcast the Saturday Dodger game on Fox, and he was there as well to work the radio broadcast and the first couple of innings on TV for the Dodgers, and was fortunate enough to be introduced to him and spent maybe 2 or 3 minutes together and had the chance to snap a picture with Vin, which is great. But I had one question for him. I had seen an interview recently, Mark, with Vin and Bob Miller, the longtime voice of the Los Angeles Kings. And in that interview, Vin mentioned that as a youngster, he would go to New York Rangers games back in the 40s at Madison Square Garden. He grew up in New York. And I said, I have one question for you. It's not a baseball question. It's not a broadcasting question. What do you remember about going to New York Rangers games as a youngster? And so eloquently, as you would only expect from Vin Scully, he started telling me stories about going to Ranger games, and he started mentioning players, Davey Kerr, who was the Ranger goalie, and Brian Hextall, as if he had just watched them yesterday. This was 70 years ago, and he had such vivid memories of going to Ranger games. And he also brought up, and I had heard this story before, the time that he skated up in the Catskill Mountains in New York at a charity function with Jackie Robinson. They laced up the skates together. So kind of an offbeat type question from me. I'm sure most of the questions to Vin revolve around baseball or broadcasting, but I actually asked him a hockey question. So it was a lot of fun to hear his answer.
Oh, that is awesome. And just for reference, Kenny Albert, he's a big hockey fan himself, and he's also the Rangers radio broadcaster these days, in addition to doing the MLB and NFL on Fox. Kenny Albert, thanks so much for taking the time out. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Anytime.